keeping your videos off to preserve bandwidth. We appreciate that. And even though I miss seeing your faces, or part of me definitely wants to, you know, be able to more visually see how things are landing. What was I gonna say? Oh, we're gonna have like a couple minutes for people to roll in right now. So if you don't have a piece of paper or notebook, or you know, if you want to take notes on something, whether that's on your computer or otherwise, feel free to get that set up and get a drink of water, or just land here on this Saturday afternoon, coming from whatever you're coming from. And welcome. We will have a bio break at some point, roughly midway through. We'll see, it probably won't be exactly midway through, but at some point a bio break to get up and go to the bathroom and whatnot. Yeah. If you're calling in from a phone, I know that it's hard to access things like the chat, and I know that you won't be able to see the graphics or the text. So I will try to explain those things and like translate what's happening visually into my words as well. And if something is ever not clear, I do want to be inclusive of folks who are phoning in. So yeah, maybe gently like unmute yourself, which is *6, and let me know if you need something. Yeah. For full transparency, oh, I don't know if that is even necessary, but this will be my first time facilitating a Zoom webinar. And yeah, bear with me. I'm here, and you know, let me know in the chat if anything is happening that's not conducive for your learning. Okay. If you want to, while you're here, while we're starting up, you could write in the chat something that brought you to the workshop today. What interests you about this topic, or what's been coming up for you? All right, we've got some more drawing on the screen, Morgan. It's not inherently problematic, but yeah, just flagging that. Excellent. We've got someone reflecting on the reason that they're here, being or becoming more able to continue their own emotional intelligence work, as well as verbalize to others how to have emotionally mindful conversations. about white supremacy and instilled racism. Oh, someone's here because a friend shared it. Great. These will be recorded and available for sharing after that to other people who can't make it live. So I think we'll get started. So who am I? Maybe you know me, maybe you don't. My name is Alana. I also go by Al. I am a member of the House of Dharma. I live in Albany, and I don't have any degrees, but I have uncountable explorations of learning. I'm from a white Mennonite background, and I identify as resource privileged. I have taken a lot of interest in activism in the past 15 years, although that's really changed a lot since maybe 2015, and I don't consider myself as much of an activist anymore. But the systemic problems around environment, violence, racism, immigration, all kind of led me back to economics. And I spent a lot of time there in economics for a while. And in more recent 5 years or so of my life, I've come back around to what about the body and how the body has been oppressed by these systems of power, and what is available in our bodies that can help us deal with and envision alternatives to systems of oppression. And we're specifically here today to be grounded in the work of following our values that Black lives do matter. And so how does like our emotional environment internally, and how does like the emotional environment of police, and how does the emotional environment of people we're having conversations with affect our abilities to show up and find what our work is? Anyhow, so that's why I'm here. Ground rules. If you've been to the other workshops, these are the same ground rules as the previous workshops. Listen actively. As something that I like to say is that observation is more productive than judgment. Judgment clouds our ability to listen and learn from others. It also clouds our ability to learn from ourselves and listen to ourselves when we're judging ourselves heavily. We're going to be talking about some potentially emotionally volatile things. We're going to be talking about pain. We're going to be talking about emotions that we don't, that society doesn't really condone that we have. So if you're noticing shame, or you're noticing fear, anxiety, all those things, like, to the best of your abilities in that moment, I invite you to remember that you don't need to judge that. It's okay to have feelings, and hopefully I'll say that enough in this presentation that we can undo some of the miseducation that we've had. Okay, ask questions, throw those questions in the chat, and stay muted and with cameras off to preserve the bandwidth. Though if you really if you want to message me and you want to come on for a question, let me know. And then, yeah, remembering to ground ourselves in why we're here. Black Lives Matter. This is a learning space. And it's a learning space specifically geared at white folk, right? So I might ask or invite or imply work that there is to be done. And I'm not implying that that is work for people of color. I'm implying that that is work for us, who have white skin or white passing privilege. Not to say that that other people who aren't white don't have you know, an interest in doing that work, but I'm not attempting to say that everyone needs to be doing this. Okay, so don't interact with trolls, and learning is ongoing, and expect those questions that come up to continue. Thanks for sharing in the chat. Yeah, I see that people have been to the previous workshops and they're shaken by the fact that there are people who freely show racist behaviors, generally seeking to learn. Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for letting us know, Sharon, that that was you on the screen. No worries. That was kind of pretty. Okay. Here we go. Speaking of learning, I think that learning and education can be an act of faith in the human capacity to grow and become more understanding. So no matter that we all grew up in a racist society and we are likely to have racist tendencies because of that, like, we still have the capacity to learn. That doesn't mean we're gonna be not racist overnight, but regardless of our flaws or things that we feel shameful about or things that we don't like or don't align with our values, we always have a chance to like learn and grow and get better with that. Something that I've been noticing a lot, especially since COVID has kind of changed a lot of society, is where do we ground? Like grounding, I'm not sure how many people know what grounding is. So to say like grounding would be locating ourselves in our body and connected to the earth. Or another way of saying it would be being in a place where we can act from stability and awareness, being present. So to do a little bit of grounding, I invite you to just like relax in some way, shrug your shoulders, and close your eyes. We are on Earth. Specifically, I'm on the lands of the Kalapuya peoples. You may be on nearby lands, you may be somewhere else in the world, but let us like honor the indigenous folks that have been here before us and continue to be here. Today is also the solstice, the changing of the seasons going into summer. The solstice is celebrated all around the world to remind us that we are a part of the natural rhythms. So much of white culture has sought to overcome the rhythms of the earth and the rhythms of the body. Today, we are coming together virtually to back up the work that we're doing to be anti-racist in other parts of our lives. Reclaiming our emotions, reclaiming our connection with each other and with the earth is a part of that. Oh, it's so weird not seeing you all. Okay. Anyhow, I noticed that brings up the emotion of anxiety in me, right? I'm a little anxious because I can't read how things are landing within a community that I'm in, and within a community that I'm going to share things in around the topic of race, which can be really, you know, I think that as white people, it's oftentimes intimidating, and there's a fear of getting things wrong. And so my hope today is not to do everything perfectly and provide, you know, an immaculate analysis. My hope is that we can engage in and learn from the topic. Okay, back to the presentation. There's nothing that you experience that has not been experienced through your body. Let that land for a second. There is nothing that you experience that has not been experienced through your body. Dominant culture, which includes consumer capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny, narrow gender roles, punitive justice, etc., relies on disconnection from our bodies in order to sustain itself. The movement for re-embodiment, or getting back into our bodies, is crucial to the movement for liberation. That said, our bodies may hold significant amounts of trauma, and the process of getting into our bodies and getting in touch with our emotions may need to be slow. Wherever you're at is okay. It's going to take time to see results and to find and feel agency with our own feelings if we haven't learned how to deal with them or how to work with them. But there's a difference between being gentle and being passive. One still takes action. So you could join me in a brief breathing exercise. This is called the square breath. It's used in many different systems. Dr. Jeevan Singh, who I quoted above, is one of the places that I've been exposed to this. And the square breath resets the autonomic nervous system. So the automatic nervous system, the part of ourself that is making decisions and moving and acting on our emotions, perhaps. For this practice, I invite you to either stand or sit, or in some position that's comfortable for you, and close your eyes. We're going to be inhaling and counting to 4 while we inhale, and then we're going to pause with the breath inside of our body, and we're going to count to 4 again, silently in your head. And then you're going to exhale, counting 4 counts. And then you're going to pause with the air all exhaled out of your body, and you're going to count for 4 counts again. Do this breath like 4 times. Close your eyes. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. All the way empty. Hold it out. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. Belly, chest. 3, 4. Hold it in. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Keep it out for pause. 2, 3, 4. Continue this breath at your own pace for 2 more breaths. After your next exhale, just release any control over the breathing. Notice that your body breathes on its own and breath changes. It can indicate where we're at. And there's no need to judge what sort of breath you're experiencing. I'm going to ask you to just notice your body. Maybe let your body feel heavy. If you're standing, notice your feet on the ground. If you're sitting, notice your tush in the chair. And ground into that contact. We may be in different spaces. I should have said, if you're driving, don't do this. I'm sure you figured that out. But I acknowledge that you may be in a space with other people around, or you may be by yourself. And so to whatever your comfort level, like, feel free to adapt. What I want to invite you to do is say the word yes. Whisper it, say it out loud, say it like you mean it. Yes. How does it feel to say yes? Okay, shake that off. Say no. How does it feel to say no? Even in a whisper, no. How does that feel? Shake it off. They feel different, don't they? Yes and no feel different. We may not have been taught that. So, we may or may not know what our yes and no is, and we may not know what our emotions are trying to tell us. We live in a world that is fundamentally difficult to make sense of. We're humans who are wired as social beings, who are wired to be in community. And yet, our societal premise is disconnection. Disconnection, while also being in this giant soup of technology and rhetoric, messages. How many messages do we see in a day? Where are they coming from? How do we know what's true? How much time does it take to, like, scientifically vet an article that we've read? How many of us are doing that? It's okay. That's like what's happening. Like, we don't need to judge ourselves for it. But the point that I'm making here is that we need to look at how we make sense of the world, and we need to look at how we access meaning. What is meaningful and what is true? Emotions are a major part of our inborn toolkit for making sense of the world. But the stories that our culture has put on our emotions may be disempowering, distorted, undoubtedly racist, and downright untrue. So let's take a look at that for a second. We have emotions and we have a mind, right? So our mind is this part that is supposed to be logical. It's where thought happens, etc. Our stories and interpretations. Our emotions originate in our brain. And I've got body underneath the brain in parentheses. And that's because we may think that the mind is what the brain is, but the brain is actually this supercomputer that picks up all these signals that are running throughout our body in the form of emotions, in the form of hormones, all sorts of other things, neurological impulses. So realizing that there's intelligence and that there's knowing inside the brain that is not connected to the mind, right? And there's information, like our brain is picking up information from our body and from our environment and from our relationships, and the mind is interpreting it. This triangle, the little teal triangle with the mind, the brain, and the relationships, is something that Daniel Siegel, a neuroscientist, puts out that I think is really helpful. It talks about basically what forms our reality. The other part of the triangle, the third corner of the triangle, is relationships. So if we're in relationships with people who share stories that make us feel fearful, with people who are abusive, with people who, any number of things, with people who perpetuate racist stereotypes, etc., that is a part of how we come to understand reality. And we're not necessarily conscious of that. Morgan, do you see someone's in the waiting room? Yeah, we're not necessarily conscious of that. So this is a picture kind of how we shape our reality, or how we're built to make sense of the world. Like, this is where our meaning is supposed to come from. I've added this oval in the back because, like many really well-intentioned white academics, scientists or emotional workers, they forget about the cultural soup. So not just is it our relationships that are providing that external feedback and creating our understanding of the world, but it's also the media that we consume and narratives of white supremacy, deep in culture, misogyny, etc. Okay. So these things, all of these things together, create automatic reactions, right? Because it's actually a lot of work to be fully aware and making decisions all the time. We have so many decisions to make. So our bodies are built to form automatic reactions and habits based on previous experience. So being conscious of what informs our experience. Okay, so back to that the brain, right? And the brain includes this whole nerves that run down the body and below the guts and into the heart, etc. So it's this huge organ. And our emotions are arising from our body and getting transmitted into our brain. Emotions, functionally speaking, are action requiring neurological programs. Emotions are probably as old as humanity. And that's not even talking about other animals. Okay, we're not gonna talk about that. Okay, so, but the reason we have emotions is because they help us make decisions. So both of these definitions come from Antonio Damasio, who is a neuroscientist, and I found out about Damasio's work through Carla McLaren, who writes a lot about emotions and empathy. And I'll refer to both of their work throughout the program. So decision-making, one definition of decision-making is the emotional process of attaching value and meaning to data. Going back to here, right? Our body, we're picking up data from our body, and we're trying to interpret it with our mind. And that's all informed by our relationships and the culture that we grew up in. So, hi, welcome newcomers. Anyone who wants to, you can share in the chat. What are some messages that you received about emotions? Like, what was our emotional education like? What did you hear about emotions? And if you're watching the replay, feel free to reflect on this and write about it. Okay. I learned not to judge people lest we be judged ourselves. I was told that crying is weak. Yeah. I'm struck by just the wonder of not judging people lest we be judged ourselves, and how that seems very virtuous, and yet we are a very judgmental culture. But that's a message I heard too. I was told that crying is weak. I get upset. I was taught it wasn't okay to be sensitive, / it was acceptable to be teased for being sensitive. Anger was to be suppressed, and no one likes talking about it. That women are moody, that being horny made you a slut, that we needed to appear happy constantly. Yeah, these are all very common. And just as a note, I will make generalizations in this presentation, and your mileage may vary, right? The emotional education that you received is highly dependent on factors such as your family of origin, work environments, ability spectrum, etc. And not everything will be addressed. But to make a generalization, most of us experienced insufficient and confusing emotional education. White men were told that anger and jealousy are the only emotions that you're allowed to feel or express. White women were told that you're too emotional, and that makes you inferior and weak. And Black, Indigenous people of color, we're by and large told that they don't get to feel or express any emotions, and that doing so is a dangerous thing to do. So this goes back to white dominance in the world and colonization. This narrative is older, or the narrative against emotions, the narrative against the body, is older than the United States. But it was brought here, and it was very common, and still is, to undervalue being connected to our emotions, and to see people who are connected to their bodies and the earth as less civilized. Purity culture, which a culture that is an outcropping of Christianity in the US. Nothing against Christianity personally, but we need to look critically at these things and see how the institution of Christianity perpetrated this idea that our bodies are sinful, and we need to overcome them, we need to suppress them, we need to not let them control us. And yet, also in the name of religion, violence has been used to enforce norms of white supremacy. So we've talked about this. We are inside of a cultural container where emotional and bodily intelligence is not only seen as inferior, but it's feared. And it's labeled irrational and untrue. I would argue that that is intentional. That has been an intentional tool that dominant culture has used to keep us apart and to keep us disconnected. We have focused on the mind and only existing from the head up. Our energy is all supposed to go to work, and therefore we don't actually have time or energy to deal with the work of changing society. Okay, keep going. Feelings are actually information. They're messengers. They might not always be true. Remember, we have a context that is fundamentally distorted. But each emotion in the human organism has a specific role for maintaining our social and cognitive functions, roles that are supposed to be there to help us survive. And our emotions, even if we ignore them, even if we say we're rational and not emotional, emotions are still there. They don't disappear unattended. They just like spurt out, or like worst case scenario, which is actually very common scenario, undealt with emotions get put onto other people, right? What is that police officer afraid of that makes it so easy for him to take a life? Okay, I'm just gonna check in with the chat. Okay. So, experiences of anxiety and fear and overwhelm and sadness and depression and apathy, those things that we like really like don't like and that give us a lot of trouble, like those are actually normal. The emotion of anxiety comes up to alert oneself to like needing to get something done. These emotions tell us that something is out of balance. They're asking us to act, right? They're action requiring neurological programs that want us to act or reorient or slow down. In the US, emotions have been pathologized and intentionally suppressed, I believe, because the people in power fear an awake and connected population that will actually be able to collaborate in order to resist oppression and dismantle racism, among other things. I think the fact that emotions have been pathologized, the fact that emotions have been named bad or good, you know, these ones are bad and these ones are good, has led us to having some of the highest rates of chronic disease and dis-ease in the world. I don't have exact statistics on that, but I know that anxiety, for example, and depression in the United States is just like through the roof. And those things aren't bad on their own, right? But when they become chronic, when they become something that we feel, that we judge ourselves for having, and that feels like they get in the way of having a life, that's problematic. Okay, so we're not going to actually delve into all these emotions in this session. But if this is something that people are interested in, I am considering offering sessions that are more specifically focused towards individual emotions and exploring tools and ways to work with them and presence them in ourselves. So, how do we start to undo this disconnection from our emotions? One thing, well, two things. Having conversations with our internal world and having conversations with other people. Now, if you attended the difficult conversations, is that what it was called? If you attended the conversations workshop in this series, I pulled out a really beautiful quote from Candace. We forget that the biggest part of learning is inquiry. So backing it up, as we're like trying to undo white supremacy, as we're trying to undo body shame, and anti-Blackness and all those other things, remember that we can inquire as to what's going on inside of ourselves, and we can inquire as to what's happening that is allowing this racist system to be perpetuated. So some of the questions that were brought up the other week in the conversation workshop are, what is being valued? What do I believe in, or what do they believe? What sort of sense are they making of the world? And do I understand what my mindset comes from, what their mindset comes from? There's a question in the chat, will we be discussing how we can dismantle the racist system? Yes, I do believe that this is a crucial part of that. I don't know if you got the beginning of the workshop, but I think that a part of white culture has been this like focus that we have to like have all these answers and fixes. And part of what I'm trying to do is the work of stepping back and understanding why people are interacting with each other in the ways that they are. Why is violence so prominent? Why is anti-Black violence so hugely prominent? It's not only because of emotions, but emotions do affect how we're able to show up and how we're able to work to dismantle oppression. Okay, so I've got a prompt up here for people to share in the chat. What feelings or emotions have you been observing within yourself and perceiving in others as you engage in conversations about anti-Blackness and the undoing of racist frameworks, as you engage in conversations about white privilege? What sort of feelings and emotions have been coming up for you or for other people? Thank you for sharing. In difficult conversations, I notice I too often use silence and avoidance out of fear of harming the relationship. Very common. I've seen way too many white leftists try to speak for the entire Black community. Yeah, there's no way that we can speak for anyone other than ourselves, really. Defensiveness on both ends, tense and anxious. Yeah. So, defensiveness, tenseness, silence, fear. I have a lot of stuff on fear coming up in the presentation. Okay. So, fear, physical discomfort, stammering, brain fog. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm inclined to pull out our book here. This is if you've got my video pinned or if you're seeing me. The Art of Empathy is a place where I got a lot of the emotional framing from, by Carla McLaren. Okay, another bit from the chat. I today spoke to someone who tried to say that we kill pigs and animals and that those lives mattered too. I felt like screaming. Yeah, so you felt like screaming. What emotions were you feeling? Do you have like words for that? Anger. We'll talk about anger for sure. Big one. Okay, I think I'm gonna. After the workshop is over, if you want me to send you a list of the questions for reflection, I can do that. I have a plan for how to do that. So I'm going to table this question that's up right now and not focus on it right now, in favor of focusing on some of the stuff that's coming up in the chat. Okay, fear. We'll talk about fear for a bit, and then we'll talk about anger. And sometimes anger is a cover or is a top emotion for fear, right? Anger is about protection. We'll get into more what that really means later. but fear. Okay, so do I have another one? Okay, I guess I don't have the actual purpose of fear written on there. So if you just hold off on reading that. Fear is showing up to orient us to change, novelty, and possible hazards. Fear focuses on the present moment. Anxiety is kind of like fear, but it focuses on the future time. So knowing that we are in a society that perpetuates racist stories, we have to realize that those racist stories have been embedded in our subconscious. Stories that we tell or have heard work their ways into becoming beliefs. Beliefs can often be like fears that are lodged in our subconscious. And our subconscious and our memory bank and our emotions are kind of collecting all this data, right? This this happens to humans, right? Just humans in general are collecting data about what could possibly hurt us. And the part of our brain that in a previous workshop, Sam referred to as the lizard brain or the survival brain, it doesn't like getting hurt. And fear, which sometimes manifests as procrastination or apathy, is a protection mechanism that is relying on that information that we've taken in. So if we've taken in the idea that Black men are dangerous, right? Fear might come up from our subconscious. We might like not be doing it intentionally. It might pop up and we might move to the other side of the street. That's what's going on. It's an emotional reaction based on things that have been lodged in our subconscious. If we dig deeper and look for the cause, you know, we can see that it is the white supremacist culture that we grew up on. But if we don't dig deep, we just see the effect. We just see, I'm afraid. And we react to being afraid. Okay, that's a little convoluted what I wrote up there on the screen. But naming our fears, reflecting on our fears is crucial to working on them. Our fears will run our lives. So we better figure out what our fears are so we know if we actually want them to run our lives. They can stop us, they can be roadblocks, or they can be signposts that are actually helping us. Okay. Speaking of fear, right, we live in a world that has a lot of things that are unsafe. Despite how astronomically more unsafe the reality of our society is for BIPOC, all humans have this wiring of fear to like help us survive. And fear has been manipulated by cultural narratives, right? And to name some kind of specific cultural narratives, the narrative of scarcity, the narrative of competition and rivalry, that we are against each other, that I need to derive my power from making sure that I have more than you, from making sure that I'm on top. We also have a lot of cultural narratives and political narratives around crime and what crime is and where crime comes from. So these are forms of manipulating the fears that we have, the fears for safety. And if we don't know what our emotions are there for, our emotions are pretty reactive. People, you see a lot of white people, a lot of defensiveness comes up because some part of their survival brain feels threatened or disoriented or afraid or ashamed or unsure. Yeah, our, you know, current president is pretty like afraid and defensive. I would say. Yeah, and I'm just side noting this, that I'm very interested in what's going on inside of the survival systems of police. I'm not saying this in any way to lessen the severity of murdering Black people, right? Like, that's a horrible thing to do. And I also, in my personal life, like, what am I here to do? What am I here to work on? I keep getting drawn to, man, as long as there are oppressors, there's gonna be oppressed. So like, how do we fucking get through? Yeah. So I think there's a multi-pronged approach of like defunding and putting money into alternate or like more healthful solutions for public safety. And then we're also gonna have to deal with like all these angry, pissed off people, all these afraid, scared people. Basically all these people who have unmet needs. And they're like the need for purpose, the need for meaning, and community. Those are universal human needs. And are we meeting them in ways that are healthy? Okay. Speaking of that, I believe that violence is fundamentally about disconnect. It is far easier to put up with and participate in violence and injustice if we are disconnected from the harm that we cause and the pain that we feel and the pain that other people feel. So, you know, killing Black people, brown people on the streets or in prisons, right? This is like a visible form of violence that we see, and that has actually been happening for a long time, and we haven't, or the white community has not like acted like we see it. But the physical violence is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like suppressing people's cultures, right? Like white supremacy that puts like whiteness as the ultimate goal, and that kind of like obliterates all this other beauty in the world. That sort of violence also exists. Cultural violence, emotional violence, and psychospiritual. We'll come back to this pyramid later. Anyhow, there's a lot of pain in the world. This is true. But as white people who also can experience pain and who also feel bad about stuff, how do we show up in dismantling these systems without letting like our emotions take over the conversation? Our activism should not be performative, right? We do not need to like tell people how bad we feel about something or how bad we feel about the killing of Black folks, right? Even though we feel bad about it, right? What we need to do is be able to translate those feelings into action. Yeah, we've already talked about this, but all emotions have the possibility to be misdirected, but all emotions are actually just their bodily functions, right? Their survival mechanisms. So, yeah. Here's a question that I find really powerful in relation to fear. Are the things that will happen if we don't act scarier than acting? Someone mentioned in the chat about fear, maybe a couple people, and how it feels to, let me find it. Yeah, fear of harming a relationship. Another big way that fear manifests is the fear of like losing our belonging, losing our access to community. So if I feel that if I speak out against racism, I will lose my friends. You know, like if I have that feeling and I don't realize what's going on, if I'm not paying attention to my emotions, I might just be like, okay, stay quiet. I'm too scared. But if we see that, oh, this fear is arising to alert me to something, to alert me to like the fact that I care about what other people think of me, oh yeah, that's like a human survival mechanism. And then I start to have agency and choice of like, you know, I need to take a risk because I actually care more about Black lives than I do about offending someone. And I don't even think that I think from a more emotionally in tune place, I will offend people less on some levels because I can learn to not come at them with defensiveness, but come at them with inquiry, or like meet them in inquiry and try to figure out what prevents them from being open to an idea. What sort of fears do they have? So we don't need to be fearless, right? Like that's not a real aspiration. We need to take action and find inspiration in spite of fear, right? Like our culture has this major fear of vulnerability. Vulnerability is like the worst thing ever. Newsflash. Like the idea of not being vulnerable is not a position of strength, right? It's just untrue. Like some of us are less vulnerable than others, and are, you know, some people are fighting real hard to protect that. But the thing is, all human beings are vulnerable because we need each other. We need other people. So get comfortable with a little bit of vulnerability, like start to value vulnerability. As we grow into adulthood, especially for those of us who have some level of stability, right? Some level of privilege in that. We need to start taking more active roles in understanding what prevents us from acting in line with our values. Are we committed as white people to recognize when our skepticism, our apathy, or our dismissal of doing work based on skepticism that it will do anything? Can we recognize when those beliefs, the beliefs that things can't change, the belief that this is just how it is, this is the status quo, we recognize that belief is actually stopping white people from participating in the movement for liberation, the movement for Black lives? I'm inclined to be really snarky here, and I don't want people to judge themselves from having apathy or from having the experience of cynicism, right? Those things are natural. But good God, what are we expecting of Black people? If we white people can be skeptical that things can change. We may not erase our skepticism entirely, but we need to own up to some responsibility here. Our belief that the status quo can't be a different way is playing a huge role in supporting it. Okay, we are almost at 6 o'clock. I want to give people a bio break, a little time to, yeah, let's say meet back here at 6:06. Get some water, go to the bathroom, or just like sit and relax. You know, check that text message that has been perplexing you. But please do, yeah, come back and be ready to go by 6:06.
And just a heads up for folks, I won't be shutting off the meeting, so you don't have to leave and come back. Just, I will pause the recording for a little bit, but then we will come back to this, so you don't have to physically leave and then re-enter the meeting.
Join me again. Okie dokie. Thanks for participating in a break with me. I'm just gonna stop the screen share for a moment, and hopefully that means you see my face. Taking a break in, you know, a 2-hour activity can be really beneficial. Our culture has a way of making us feel like we have to always be doing things. And it's really hard to check in with our emotional awareness and understanding if we don't give ourselves little breaks to recenter, come back to what we're feeling, not just what we're thinking or worrying about, although worry is a feeling as well. Yeah, but to have some distance from the emotions that are rising and to be able to see what emotions are arising. So if everybody wouldn't mind joining me in just a deep breath, or whatever type of breath is comfortable. Take a breath in, and then go, ah. Let out some sound. I honor if you don't feel able to make sound in the environment that you're in. Maybe let out just like a quiet sigh. But anyhow, do another breath in, drawing breath into the belly, the chest, up here. Let it out. Okay. Screen share. I do that like this. On this one. Okay. Share. Now, are we on the presentation? Hey, hey. Okay. Anger. Let's talk about anger. Oh, wait. My chat went away. I want to have the chat visible. That's important to me. Meeting controls. Where's the chat? Okay, I want to see the chat. Come here. Oh, don't do that, but definitely show the chat. Okay, got it. Here we are. Okay. Anger. What are, like, okay, just a reminder, right? Emotions are not inherently good or bad. They're action requiring neurological programs. One of the main functions of anger is the protection of self and others. Anger also serves our boundaries, helps remind us of having boundaries. And anger arises to address challenges to your voice, your standpoint, position, your interpersonal boundaries, or self-image. Remembering that we live in a society that tries to inform our standpoints and position from racist attitudes, right? We can see that, you know, anger can arise in ways that aren't actually protective to life. But the function of anger is to protect. So the task with anger is to restore your own boundaries without violating the boundaries of others. The questions to ask for anger are what must be protected and what must be restored. The other part that I wanted to point out about this is, so anger arises to like perceived threats or challenges, right? They can be real or they can be perceived. Yeah. And anger can feel really powerful. Sorry about the typo. You know, like you feel that surge in your body, right? The, you know, like, it can also be addictive. Like I'll share like a personal story here. One time that My father, who was formerly my employer, was talking with me in a way that he frequently did, in a way that I hated. I yelled. I like felt the anger come up in my body, right? And it feels like powerful. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use this right now. And I'm like, here's the cuss word, fuck you. And I yelled that at him. And then I was like, and I don't mean fuck you, I hate you. I mean, fuck you when you treat me that way. And I'm white, and I was in a relatively safe space, and I could do that. And that felt so cathartic. And yet, that's not the way, like yelling at people is not functional in all situations. And like allowing anger to flare in those ways, like, again, I want to like note that I'm specifically talking to white people here. I'm not trying to tell like Black people what to do with their emotions, because we'll get to that. Like we'll get to like how different it is for like suppressed populations to have to like hold on to their emotions. But lost my train of thought there. Yeah, anger can be addictive, and I think that we have, like, that's where the topic of like toxic masculinity comes from. It's like we've given men only 2 emotions that they can feel, right? And so like their protector drive is on overdrive, and they're like trying to be a warrior and trying to like do something, right? And so like what happens? Anyhow, anger can be channeled into a lot of things, including hate and including love. The movement that supports Trump's views is an example of using anger for hate, directing violence towards what their stories say are threatening, like Blackness, current day immigration, queerness, etc. Anger can also be used to prevent oneself from feeling other emotions, right? My anger comes up like, oh, something has like made me feel ashamed or made me feel embarrassed. You know, those like shame and embarrassment are coming up to try to like help us be accountable to the community. But we feel angry that we feel them. And so anger comes out on top, especially if it's the only emotion we've been allowed. And that can keep us from being in touch with those other emotions, including fear, that feel more scary, those emotions that we've disowned, whether internally, societally, or both. So what does healthy expression even look like? I want to share this video segment because it really struck me as a healthy expression of anger. And so it's from a movie, which is free on YouTube right now for the month of June. And the movie's called Just Mercy. It portrays some of the work done by the Equal Justice. Did somebody say something? Okay. It portrays some of the work done by the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama in the 80s and 90s that was specifically directed at getting wrongly accused people off of death row. The movie is based on a memoir, on real happenings of somebody named Brian Stevenson, who is a Black lawyer who like made the Equal Justice Initiative his mission. Anyhow, this specific scene involves, like, it's where we're coming in the movie is they have had trial proceedings and Stevenson, the lawyer, has like presented all this evidence about how testimony against Walter McMillan was forced and was fake and is inaccurate. And they did a really wonderful job of presenting it and casting doubt, and therefore like with the intent to reopen the case. And yeah, the person whose emotions I'm like most focused on in this scene is Walter Macmillan's son. So this is somebody who's 17 years old, Black, has like, his dad has been in prison for many years and like may get the death penalty for something that he had nothing to do with. Okay, now I want to share the other screen. Let me make this big. One moment here. Stop screen share. Do other screen share. This one. Okay. Here we are in the courtroom. Why can't we start? There's the play button.
Sit down. It's my dad's son. Sit down. Ain't nothing wrong. Ain't nothing wrong. Sit down right now, or you'll be arrested for contempt of court. Just give me 1 second. Please, Judge. Hold on 1 second. I won't say it again. Sit down. Not if you want to kill my dad for no reason. Not if you want to kill my dad for no reason. He did nothing wrong. You killing my son?
So I'm gonna pause us there and take us back to, where can we see like the courtroom scene? There's a lot of emotion going on here. Yeah, let's leave it on that one. What sort of emotion comes up for folks? Like, what do you observe in this scene? Something that I observe is the community, right? There's fear coming up in the community, and that fear is performing its emotional function of trying to alert yourself and others to danger, right? It is dangerous in this situation, as it is in many situations, for a Black person to resist what a white person has said. And, you know, so there's that fear element going on. There's also, you know, we see sadness and fear and mourning. You know, this person like has been, like, something unjust, deeply unjust is going on here. And there are complex emotions felt about it. And then there's anger, you know, that comes up. And so let me stop sharing this. Did somebody say something?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Lana. I actually went to a meeting. I've met you before. Weird. Okay, anyways, I'm just unsightly right now. Anyways,
You're good.
Another thing to notice, I'm not sure if that's a film or if it's like a recorded situational thing. It looks like a film. But
it is a film. It's of like real events. Like it's from yeah, a real court case that happened.
Well, like a lot of what you can see in like this case is this the guy's, even his facial expressions, is like the way he's expressing things is the way it is when you're being heavily manipulated and gaslighted for such a long period of time. And when you even see people who are supposed to be on your team telling you to sit down because they know better than you that you can't have catharsis, you're not allowed catharsis, and you're living in this world where like you can't tell, you can't really, you're completely robbed of your ability to see what reality is, because it gets so morphed around you, because yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
This stunning expression.
Yeah, like, or like you can see reality, you can see that it's unjust, but it doesn't match up with the reality that's being forced on you, right? And I think that's a really, like, you brought up gaslighting as like, yeah, that's intense.
And also, I did come in late, but I also feel like, I don't know if any of you guys have seen that thing on Netflix, 13th. Heavily suggest that. But yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Someone else shared in the chat, the sun has reached a breaking point after so much pain and loss and having been quiet for so long. Yeah. So there's this immense level of constraint, right, that is put on these individuals and, you know, put on Black people in general. And like, what happens physically when you're not allowed to complete the action that your emotion is telling you to do, right? And Bessel van der Kolk, who does a lot of work on trauma, doesn't talk about race, but hopefully he will someday. He talks about how, you know, when a natural disaster happens, there's all this cortisol in your body, and cortisol is a stress hormone, and there's other stress hormones too in there. And you, like, what your body wants to do is do something about what has just happened. And if it doesn't get to do something, right, if you're restrained or you otherwise can't do something, then that cortisol, that stress, doesn't have anywhere to go. And chronic stress, chronic trauma that has to be held in and can't be like held by community, or can't be released, or can't be like used to like bring about justice, right, has long-term health effects. And if you're interested in this stuff, I think it's really important that we have more people paying attention to this research and helping in the research of like the high rates of chronic illness for folks who are Black in this country. Like, it is not due to like race, it's due to racism, right? It's due to what their bodies have had to sustain over generations. Yeah, I think that's really, there is fortunately a lot of like research coming out in that, and then, you know, people getting more aware of that. Okay, let's go back to the slideshow. Full screen, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, one moment here. Oh, the other thing, right? That expression of anger was like legitimate. Yeah, like that was a healthy way to express his anger, the son to express the anger, right? And if I was in his position as a white individual, I would have wanted to do the same thing, and I would have been able to do it more safely. The clip goes on to show him getting apprehended and he's taken to jail, right? But if that was, you know, someone I knew and loved up there, who I knew had been, or, you know, anyone who had been unjustly convicted, you know, those same emotions would have come up in me, but I also wouldn't be carrying, you know, the long-term baggage or baggage. We have negative assumptions with that, but I would be like, whatever. I'm not carrying the long-term effects of my race having been murdered over and over again, even though I maybe should try to figure out how to keep that more in my awareness. Okay, next slide. So we talked about this. And this is where we get back to this. I'm sharing this screen, right? Yeah. this is where we get back to this pyramid of violence, or the iceberg of violence, right? Like, I firmly believe and have come to understand that the violence against Black and Indigenous people of color is so deep, right? It has penetrated into the nervous systems, you know, of a collective, of people's bodies. And can white people honor the pain that racism has caused without spending all of our time on guilt, grief, overwhelm, depression, and distraction, right? All of these emotions, and we don't have time to go into it today, but they all, guilt, grief, overwhelm, depression, like those four, like, serve as indicators of something being wrong, something being off balance, right? So we can view our emotions as caves that we get stuck in, or we can view our emotions right, we can view our emotions as tunnels that, like, direct us somewhere. And I want to honor that, like, depression is a very, like, nuanced topic, and yeah, so, like, this is not to, like, again, not to shame having any of these emotions. These emotions are useful, right? And I think why depression and anxiety are so chronic in our society is because we have not built cultural practices around working with and, like, completing the functions of these emotions. Instead, we've gone for distraction, right? But is distraction the choice we want to make right now? We are needed. We're late, probably, but going forward, will we show up? Love's a verb. Okay. Let's see, let me just check one thing. Okay, yeah, I want to do a, doing good on time, so I want to do a exercise. I think I'm gonna put my video on it for now. You know, and actually we have the amount of people that we have in this room, I think our bandwidth could handle putting your videos on if you want to, no pressure. I wanted to just lead us in an exercise that I learned from Pema Chodron, who is an American Buddhist writer that I really appreciate. And so she has this practice that she shares where we breathe in for the pain and suffering in the world. And then we breathe out love. And the way that this practice can be used is a way of working with our emotions, right? If we're feeling like sadness, say, like, as a white person, I'm feeling like grief, or, you know, anyone as any color person is feeling something, you can, with that in-breath, connect into the wounding and what has happened, and with the out-breath, like, give it love. And that's a way to kind of, like, calm our systems down. So I invite you to breathe in for all the agony that Black lives have had to face. and breathe out love. And maybe it's hard to feel. Maybe the practice doesn't feel like it's doing anything. Maybe your mind is like, how is this fixing racism? There are so many pieces to this work. This is just one offering of a way to honor where we're at, so that we are able to be grounded enough that we can orient to how we affect change, which we'll get to. The exercise also can be for, like, you know, any experience. Like, it's gonna sound trivial after, you know, the breath that we just did, but you know, you can be like, for anyone who's ever had hip pain, oh my gosh, I have so much hip pain. You know, you're like, in the moment that you're feeling hip pain, you can breathe into your hip pain and be like, and know that other people have had that pain, and then breathe out loud. And you can repeat that multiple times, right? Like I think maybe, you know, to deal with the first breath example that we did there with, you know, the violence and agony that Black folk have had to put up with. Like, do that a lot of times before I get to a place of like really feeling it. And if you feel numbness, like, numbness is also a sensation, right? It's also an information. I think we touched on this briefly earlier, that like, yeah, numbing out, like distracting, disconnecting from our feelings is a response that many of us have, like our systems have conditioned in order to like keep us safe, in order to make us like not, in order to cope with a world that has been too traumatic. And we have to like titrate, you know, like drop little bits of emotional presence back in there in a way that suits your own nervous system. Okay, screen share. Screen share. Share screen. This one. Why are we not totally full screen? Totally full screen it. There we go. That'll go away, I hope. Okay. So, we're here. Love is a verb. Oh, maybe it's already there, it's shared now. And bring my chat back up. Love is a verb. What are we gonna do about it? What are we gonna do about this like love and care that we have for the world? I'm gonna, while I bring up this video, you can sit with this quote from one of my favorite writers and thinkers of right now. Adrienne Marie Brown says, "The heart is a front line, and the fight is to feel in a world of distractions." I'm pulling up the video, and I'm gonna start it. I want to just note that I don't know what is most correct. Or I want to note that I feel somewhat awkward having the two videos that we show in a workshop for, you know, white people to like learn about anti-racism. That two videos are centered around or centered around Black folks in the US. And I do that because like these are the videos that I see, or that like feel like really potent examples of how these emotions are showing up in justified ways, and in powerful, useful ways. Yeah, but I notice I have some sort of like anxiety or guilt of like, oh, am I doing a weird white thing? I don't know. Like, I don't want to be engaging in like drama porn. I don't want to be engaging in like, yeah, like using or devaluing or whatnot. And I don't think it is, but there's still that those emotions that come up and warn me. So I'm going to show this movie anyways. Yeah, I want it to be full screen. Screen share. This one. Share it. Go full screen. And this person's name is Kimberly Jones.
That as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not. And the looters almost exclusively are just there to do that, to loot. Now, people are like, well, what did you gain? Well, what did you get from looting? I think that as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not focusing on the why. And that's my issue with that. As long as we're focusing on what they're doing, we're not focusing on why they're doing. And some people are like, well, those are people who are legitimately angry about what's happening. Those are people who just want to get stuff. Okay, well then, let's go with that. Let's say that's what it is. Let's ask ourselves why in this country in 2020, the financial gap between poor Blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like their only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through a broken glass window and get it. But they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that change, getting that bag, getting that phone, whatever it is they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Why are people that food insecure, that clothing insecure, that they feel like they're only shot, that they are shooting their shots by walking through a broken glass window to get what they need. And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pull themselves up out of bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that Black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money. I didn't allow you to have anything on the board. I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa. That was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, well, your equal opportunity higher. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, and you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood. How can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. There is Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have. That if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, motherfucker, do I give a shit about burning the fucking football Hall of Fame, about burning the fucking target. You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and you give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so fuck your targets. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
Yeah. So, yeah, go Kimberly, go. All sorts of emotions, so justified. I see some activity in the chat, and yes, we will, we'll, yeah, we'll have a little bit of time for some discussion and sharing. And yeah, maybe that's a good thing to do. Yeah, now, somebody mentioned wanting to add something about white guilt. And we can definitely talk about that a little bit. I also want to like pitch or next week's workshop, which Dharma from some previous workshops and I think another person are going to specifically delve into guilt, white guilt and shame, and white fragility. So that is like a big conversation, and we'll get there. And yeah, the other things that I have, there's just like a couple more things planned for this, but Elsie, do you wanna pipe in?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I guess I just want to quickly say about white guilt. White guilt. That is, it's perfectly natural to feel absolutely horrible about these things, and most of the time, growth experiences are extremely uncomfortable. It takes a lot to learn that something is completely the opposite of how you perceive it to be. But the best thing that you can do is give yourself some time to seriously cry it out. You know, get it out, whatever. But the only thing you can do is move forward. And so one thing you can seriously take solace in is education. If you don't know what to do and you feel completely powerless, the best thing that you can do is go onto Twitter or go find some websites or documents. I can link a bunch of things. Get educated. That's the best thing you can do. And then that might also help you sort through how you feel and how you align with what's going on and how you think the best of your abilities you can add to it. But that's it for me.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the presentation. I'm gonna make it do the real full thing. Then we're gonna go this way. So I don't know how many of you have a piece of paper or something to write on or type on, but this is an exercise that I learned through a colleague of mine named Asana Ray. I think that she got it from somewhere else, but I haven't cross-referenced it yet. But this is a writing exercise that helps us frame anger in a loving way, right? So you write out, I am angry, or I am experiencing anger because I love. And then you you follow that with, yeah, what is that anger showing up to protect? I am angry because I love. So I just want to take a couple minutes to write on that. I covered up my time. And be with that, let's say, do like 3 minutes. It will also be a prompt that is one of the prompts that I can provide if you sign up to get like a resource list after this. So, I'm angry because I love. I kind of want to go in and change that on my presentation to make it more simple. I didn't update it. Also, if you don't connect with the emotion of anger, it's possible that you don't connect with it. I didn't used to connect with it. Yeah, but I think that we need to start connecting with it more and using it for its noble uses. I'm just gonna take down this prompt and put it back up. Let me fix that. Maybe I'm not gonna try to fix it. Okay. Okay. And start wrapping that up, knowing that you can go back to that exercise anytime you're feeling anger. Anytime you're feeling anger. Okay. We've talked about that. Yeah, I think that we need to be angry. I think that we need to put our feelings to good use. And those of us with white skin and white passing skin are able to do different things, to do some things more safely than people of color in this country. So where can we show up and use our privilege, and where can we show up and address these issues? Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is this common trope of like, oh, what can I do? Like, what can I do? And it's understandable to be like, oh my God, what can I do? This system is so big and entrenched, and like, how can I as one person ever affect it? Right? That's like an understandable view, but it's like, we can't accept that as, right? Like, in this moment, more people are listening to the movement for Black lives. And we cannot let it drop off. Like, we can't let our participation as white folks be a fad. right? Because these systems are big. The systems of white supremacy, the systems of anti-Blackness, like, they're huge, okay? So we need all of us. We need as many of us as possible, and we need some of us working with people who aren't yet open to it. Okay, that was a little bit of me answering this question that you're seeing here. How can I integrate anti-racism into the work I'm already doing or interested in? Myself, I feel some level of, you know, maybe we'll talk about this next week in the guilt and shame workshop, but I feel some level of fear, guilt, anxiety, shame around being interested in like, what is this? Like, do I really want to, like, as a white, like, queer, gender non-conforming individual, like, is my population to work with really like heterosexual white men? It might be. I might like feel like self-conscious that I should be like putting my efforts into like, yeah, different things, right? But if I look closely, it is my fear of not belonging in leftist or liberal whatever circles that kind of like quiets the intuitive voice in me that says, wow, I'm like maybe supposed to work with oppressors. To say, what do we need? We need a lot. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can show up. Something happened on the chat. Let me see the chat. Yeah. So, yeah, I was realizing that I wanted to add administrators to this list, and this list is by no means exhaustive. But I think that, you know, besides making calls to police departments demanding justice and like investing our money in Black-owned businesses and like redistributing our resources, you know, which like we should hopefully do on an ongoing basis, and showing up for demonstrations if that's something that's accessible to us, and educating ourselves. Those are all ongoing things. But how can we bring anti-racist work into, you know, the things that we spend a lot of time on already, or the things that we're already interested in? Say you're interested in trauma, you know, how can you use your like resources and understanding and research about that to also bring an anti-racist element? How can you like help groups collaborate? If you know, if you're a connector, right? If you're somebody who brings people together, because in the past, in the civil rights movement, you know, came up in the 60s and 70s, right? Like there was intentional efforts by the powers that be to make sure that it didn't become too intersectional, that there wasn't as big of a mass involved, you know, that queer people got, or gay and lesbian as they were referred to at the time, like got enough crumbs, and white women got some crumbs, and all these people got some crumbs, so they backed out of the support and fight for Black liberation. So yeah. Any other questions or thoughts coming up? Feelings, things you want to share? Yeah. And you're welcome to put your video on too if you want to share that. You're welcome to share in the chat. Something that I would note about this slide down here under redistribution of resources and access. Doesn't really have anything to do with emotion, but it's something else that I'm passionate about. You know, we live in, or I live, and this workshop is based in the state that is called Oregon. And as you know, Sam educated the other week in one of the workshops, which if you haven't watched it, go watch it. We have this kind of complex, like we live in a all white area, so how do we deal with racism? And in terms of redistribution of resources, I think part of it means like, yeah, sending money out of state, sending like goods out of state. Like people buy stuff online all the time now. It's not really an excuse that there aren't like local businesses that you see that you can, or that you know of that you can invest in. Yeah, and so anyhow, that's a note on that. Morgan shares, I'm looking at how this is an issue in my recovery, fitness, and other support network spaces. Yeah, all these spaces that function. Yeah, big thanks to Dharma, John Burrow for letting me borrow his space, Cole Bauman, Reed McCallow, Carla McLaren, Antonio Damasio, Bessel Vanderkolk, Daniel Siegel, Candace from last week, and I forgot to figure out what the other person's name was, but I appreciated what they said. Brene Brown, maybe just Mercy, and Adrienne Marie Brown, Sana Ray. Yeah, and thanks all of you. If you are interested in engaging more with this type of work, it's some of my life's work, and yeah, I'm happy to share a compilation of like the questions and reflection that are in here in this workshop. I'll share that via email, and also a resource list for like where some of this information is coming from, and also I have like some articles about that touch into emotional intelligence and mindfulness and anti-racism. If you want like something short to give folks an intro with. Okay, paste. And that in the chat. Elsie says, check out 13th on Netflix if you haven't. Yeah, I hear really, yeah, it's really important history about, yeah, how our country was formed. Yeah, and thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.